I watched a few of these. So.
Yeah. Hey guys, we're here for our next session. We have Nicholas Fett, CTO at Tellor. And can you guys just confirm you can hear him?
Hey, oh yeah, I guess I have to talk. Can you guys hear me okay? Test. All right, looks like we're good to go. At least somebody from Tellor is here. So, all right, I'm gonna get going. Hey guys, I'm Nick Fett. I'm the CTO and one of the founders here at Tellor, and we're an Oracle on Ethereum. First off, yeah, thanks everyone for coming. And although I'm going to touch on Tellor a bit, mainly I'm just going to talk about some of the designs in Oracle, what's currently being used in DeFi as far as oracles go. And then really I'm just going to talk about what we can do about it. But if you haven't heard about Tellor, quick shameless plug here, head on over to tellor.io and give us a look if you need an oracle in your project. So I'm going to switch on over to full screen view. Okay, so now before I get into what's kind of currently being used in DeFi, I want to talk to you guys about the love story between oracles and blockchains and how it all went down. So even before Ethereum, the glorified escrow contracts, which we call smart contracts, realized that they needed a way to access off-chain information. Early adopters recognized that playing around with digital ledger entries is only so much fun if you can reference these self-contained transactions. And so the dream of having access to off-chain information began. So, they started early on with visions of derivatives, stablecoins, prediction markets, and other gambling protocols for the speculators in the space. And, like any good community of entrepreneurs would do, we began to build these products to meet the demand. And it worked, sort of. We have all those things, but unfortunately now we're all stuck in the position of looking at these products and wondering if they actually deliver. So as more money gets thrown into these protocols, we're just now beginning to look and see if they actually ever develop the Oracle technology to make these things trustless like they promised. So stepping back from the landscape, let's look at what an Oracle actually is. So before there was any differentiation of on-chain versus off-chain data, all you had were databases. The question a decade ago was very similar to the Oracle problem. How do you come to consensus on data? As we all know, the solution to this was Bitcoin and the blockchain. Regardless of what system you're running, they all have various ways of agreeing upon specified data, who's sending who what in Bitcoin's case, and this is all built into the system. Oracles differ because there is no pre-specified consensus mechanism. You need something not only to reach consensus on pre-specified fields, which work nicely with, say, payment systems or things like Ethereum, but also on other things, namely information about some event or state that's not at all related to your blockchain structure. So the big difference here is that now the consensus layer is on-chain, namely the pieces that determine both who can push the data and then whether or not this is correct. So now let's just get into some designs for oracles. So as you all know, the easiest oracle is just one person. You either enter the price yourself or you can whitelist me to enter it into your smart contract, and I'm going to throw it in there. For those that don't know, the biggest name for this method in the Ethereum space is Provable, formerly Oracleize. And to be fair, it works really well. It's just a completely centralized model, but it's also simple and easy to understand who's in charge. The obvious risk here is that the central party can either manipulate your price data, or if they shut down their servers, you don't even get a price. This latter problem is what we call a lack of aliveness guarantee. So moving on, the second easiest design for an oracle is a multi-sig. So for this design, you don't whitelist just one person, you whitelist a handful of parties, and then they all place data on chain, and then you take the median, average, or whatever other transformation you want to do. So as you can tell, this is a little better, more like the proof of authority version of an oracle, if we're correlating them with layer 1 solutions. And, so if this is, say, the V2 oracle, not to burst any bubbles here, but most of DeFi right now is really between version 1.5 and 2.5. We're really not much beyond here. So, of course, there are more designs on this. So a slightly worse version that you see around is where you have multiple parties sign prices, and then one party or a list of a few parties push. So this sort of separates the risks. So in this oracle, one group of parties can manipulate the value, and the other can censor your system by just shutting down and not pushing prices on chain. So you may have both collusion and liveness issues here. A big question you have to ask yourself whenever looking at all of these reputation-based systems really is whether or not more parties that are known make something more decentralized or censorship resistant. Some may say yes. So, if you have Goldman, Deutsche Bank, and Bank of America setting your price, is this better than just JP Morgan? Maybe, but it's for sure not quite the home run that the Bitcoin OGs dreamt of. So next, kind of like the POA system would be a DPoS or proof of stake oracle. Here you have whitelisted nodes that have to stake a deposit that they can lose if they lie when reporting. So this is better, but you have to pay close attention to the whitelisting process. Can they unwhitelist everyone on a dime? What's the security mechanism for slashing? How do nodes get added? And kind of for any of the blockchains, you really just need to pay attention. How well do the nodes communicate off-chain? Meaning, how easily can they collude? So the point of centralization with these, it may be obscured, but it's still there. Okay, so now kind of on a positive note on the design space, let's talk real quick about prediction market oracles. Probably not as popular now. They had their day in the sun, and really a lot of literature in the space was sort of written by these guys, so it would be unfair not to point them out. These work by simply placing a bet or kind of voting on the right outcome. So if you assume that you have 51% honesty in your system and the parties, mainly everyone, doesn't want to lose money, it works and is decentralized. I like these methods a lot. It sort of formed my own thinking. But unfortunately, kind of mainly regulatory concerns, along with kind of speed, liquidity, and even cost concerns have sort of made them untenable at the current moment. So, but I think you'll see some of these play a role for certain needs in the future. And, they sort of pioneered the Oracle space, especially on Ethereum. But that's basically it for what's in use in DeFi. So the design space sort of continues to innovate, or at least raise lots of money to try and obfuscate centralization. But I think we're going to start seeing users demanding better whenever options start coming online. So similar, you saw a backlash against Tether or centralized exchanges. It's a slow process, but, I think oracles are just going to be added to that list of things that are on their way out as far as centralized ones go. So despite all of these centralized designs, the truth is that we always knew how to crypto-economically validate data. We do it with Bitcoin and every other layer one, or good layer one. You have a way to pick some anonymous person or group of persons to enter the information. Then you add in some sort of probabilistic finality so that the community can collectively agree on whether or not to accept this answer. As long as you make it economically expensive to pretend to be the majority for any period of time, you're good to go. This is how we built our system, and others are starting to build the same things. Getting back to the basics. But as you guys all know, there are drawbacks. So like any decentralized layer one chain, this is slow and expensive. So if you take anything from this talk, just realize that the scalability trilemma holds for oracles too. So anyone that tells you differently likely has a coin to sell you. As is kind of widely recognized in the EOS ridicule, Ethereans and Bitcoiners alike have realized that instantaneous transactions when it comes to layer one are a dream. But for some reason, DeFi doesn't accept this or just hasn't made the connection when it comes to oracles. So now that we have models, though, let's see what's currently in use in DeFi. So, I know the number of partnerships out there and all the noise in the crypto echo chamber make DeFi look huge, but in reality, you can count 10, maybe 20 if you stretch it, projects with kind of actual volume. And I don't think our litmus test for decentralization would really give any of them a passing grade on their oracle. So first on the list is Maker. So depending on how you measure it, this is basically all of DeFi at the moment. I think it's been said, if you're not using DAI in your protocol, you're probably not even trying. I joke, but really the other stablecoins don't even attempt decentralization. So on their Oracle for Maker, though, keep in mind that Maker's Oracle is not only used for Maker, but also other projects in the space kind of piggyback on it. So notably DYDX uses it, and then many other smaller projects that need kind of just an ETH US dollar feed also piggyback on it. So now Maker's structure at the moment, it's basically a complex proof of authority model with a lot of secrecy. So they've luckily recently moved to a model where anybody can be a relayer, but who the data providers are, so they have these off-chain people who sign data, they remain out of sight. So actually the only reason I wouldn't give them a completely failing grade for their Oracle is that they sort of just follow some best practices, namely that they have an hour-long delay in their Oracle updates. So this Oracle security module that they call it, it's a smart contract that allows their token holders to accept, basically say whether or not the Oracle pushed a bad value, and the token holders can freeze the entire DAI system. So this is actually cool. It's a good thing. It means that the Oracle isn't completely in charge of their protocol. Now, if you're using DAI, token holders being able to freeze the system may not be comforting, but at least it's a slightly more democratic process than a centralized Oracle. And not to bash on Maker at all here. So, they do great work and they have some cool features on their roadmap. But if you're using their Oracle or DAI now, just be sure that you know this stuff, because, unfortunately, I wouldn't quite, it's not up to par on the censorship resistant piece. So next on the list in DeFi, we have Compound. So I actually didn't draw out the diagram here because they actually have a really similar structure to Maker, but they just have their own reporters, and then they also have a different mechanism for what happens once it gets pushed on chain. The one thing to note is that their roadmap is different. So whereas Maker's Oracle plan, at least the ones that they've talked about, they seem to be kind of continuing to perfect their POA Oracle. Compound has stated that they're sort of looking for decentralized versions once they come online. So kudos to them. And also, I have to say they are smart like Maker in how they use them. So mainly they don't expect these oracles to be instantaneous, which is a good thing, which I'll talk about. Now for the last of the DeFi projects with a bit of volume. I put up here Synthetics, Aave, BZX, and Set. So right now these guys all use Chainlink. I know Chainlink has 1 billion partners, but as far as DeFi with some volume goes, this is really the A-list right here. So as a disclaimer, this is to my best knowledge how Chainlink currently works. So it's actually really hard to figure out, which for those that kind of like the readability of Maker's code it's sort of a negative in terms of transparency. But yes, Chainlink has a centralized whitelisting agency that gets nodes to report various price feeds. That's about it. They have a bunch of stuff on the roadmap, but what's live now, it's basically just a completely reputation of Chainlink based Oracle. So use at your own risk. And that's about it. DeFi is basically using 2 Oracle structures that are at best kind of sort of decentralized. There are other projects out there, note I didn't mention Augur or Gnosis, but in terms of things that need oracles and things with some volume, this is about it. Also, I need to point out that just because you have a good method for getting your data on chain doesn't mean that it's even a good fit for what you're trying to do. Oracles and following some best practices are really just half the battle. The other half is picking which data you should use. So the number of derivative projects out there that use a last traded price or some liquid auction for their settlement price is sort of ridiculous in the space. And this isn't a blockchain issue. So the traditional finance world has just mountains of literature on what makes a robust settlement procedure, and it's definitely one of the parts that we shouldn't throw away when putting all of these projects on chain. Anyway, that's for a different talk. But on to why this actually matters. So I'm sure you've heard it a million times that we as a space are having an identity crisis. What is crypto built for? What is Ethereum built for? What is the purpose of DeFi? Are we removing middlemen, banking the unbanked, making backends slightly more efficient? Or are we creating something that is resistant to the current regulatory and power structures of current financial markets? The big problem with using centralized oracles is that there's a choke point. There's a squeeze that regulators can go after, and all of this money is at risk. There's a small group of individuals that can massively cash out or screw us all over if they so choose. We don't have current censorship resistant in DeFi. Now, I don't mind if one group of token holders can censor you, or if the Ethereum community or a small group of thought leaders is ultimately in charge of the state of these systems. That's a discussion we need to have on token distribution, transparency, and governance in these things. But that's sort of for another time. It's in the open. Everybody knows about it, and we talk about it all the time. What's not being talked about right now is that there are literally a handful of people who run these oracles that can shut down all of DeFi. So you'll hear arguments that we rely on their reputation and the fact that they wouldn't want to ruin their good standing. But this is the same argument you could make for letting a consortium of banks decide your settlement price. We need to move away from this fast, and we need to demand that new projects coming into the space don't continue to centralize and compound on this risk. So now for the solution. So projects might not like me for saying this, but you have to make your UX worse. So the current designs of oracles are centralized for a large part because they are shoehorned into projects that don't work with decentralized ones. We're all in the crypto space. We know how it works to decentralize something. If your buddy has a finance application with a centralized server and he wanted to know what it would look like with a decentralized backend, what would you tell him? So first, you would tell him that he really, really, really needs to think about whether or not he wants to do this. You would explain things like probabilistic finality, slow block times, and congestion issues. If he still thought that it made sense, you tell him to make sure that his users, they're going to have to know that they're going to have to wait for confirmations, and they'll actually have to pay a small amount called gas if they want to do anything with his application. This would not be a sales pitch of a plug-and-play server. There would be edge cases he'd need to handle and new procedures that would need to be put in place. This wouldn't be a quick hack. He'd probably come back to you and say something like, well, what if we progressively decentralize? So, aka move certain pieces to Ethereum over time. And you'd rightly tell him that you're only as strong as your weakest point. And there's really no point to it other than a press release. Users and front ends would get built around the current fast and free design, and you'd have none of the benefits of decentralization. So why then do we build on top of oracles differently? Why do we get it when it comes to layer 1, but not subsequent layers? Right now, it feels as though many projects are just adding crazy layers of complexity to hide the fact that they're no different than their centralized counterparties when it comes down to it. As a space, we need to realize that progressive decentralization, crazy levels of complexity, doesn't work when it comes to oracles and is dangerous when it comes to handling users' money. If you're building a derivatives project that needs an oracle queried and validated in real time, you're out of luck. Hell, even if you need sub-minute updates on Ethereum, you're going to pay a lot and have a bad time during periods of stress. Don't listen to someone that tells you that they've built this. The solution is both supply and demand based, but in both cases, we need to supply and demand better. We need to build slower projects with a twinge more revolution. So as someone building on Ethereum, we need to build things that make sense on Ethereum. We continue to build financial products that mimic real-world companies, and all that's changed is the back end and regulatory protections. If we keep this up, we'll ultimately get regulated out of existence or simply fail to scale as products have no meaningful differentiation from their centralized alternatives. To end the talk, though, if you're building a project, need an oracle, give Tellor a look. At least go read some of our materials on best practices so you can think through your design and your settlement procedure. So thanks, everyone, for listening. Now I guess I can get back to some questions. So I will flip on my video now if I can figure out how. All right. Anything we have. But yeah, I guess anybody have any questions? I can start scrolling through some of these things here. So yeah, I mean, right now, if you guys are just ranting on awful oracles, which is definitely well said. I think so. Okay, so we have one question. Hi, Nick. Could you talk a bit about Black Thursday in the context of oracles? Yeah, Black Thursday So there weren't necessarily Oracle problems. So there's two sort of issues when it comes to oracles. One kind of like I was saying, it's getting the right price, but a bigger problem that the space kind of has is just kind of designing their projects to use decentralized oracles. And a lot of these projects, so if you're running, say, a high frequency trading app or something, they build it along like, hey, we need an off-chain price every minute on Ethereum. And then what happened in Black Thursday was everything just went crazy. So gas prices shot through the roof, like crazy high. You got to pay $20-$30 to get a transaction through. So all of the oracles, MakerDAO, Chainlink, everyone, Tellor included, they failed to be able to push. So, this was the whole system froze. And the problem is that if your application is reliant on your oracle pushing and it breaks, that's a bad thing. You should build it. That's kind of why I said in my talk, you need things to be slower, because if you rely on the fact that your oracle needs to be updated in real time, you're just going to have a bad problem. I think the other pieces here are that you need the users who want it to be able to pay for those gas prices. Whenever you just have a purely reputation-based system like a centralized oracle, if they don't get any extra money for pushing it faster or for paying those $20 to $30 gas prices, you're not going to be able to get it faster. You need to sort of have a competition or some way for the user to actually pay for the gas prices. And I think a lot of oracles weren't necessarily designed that way. So that's something that really, I hope, gets fixed. A lot of it just sort of has to do with the design of a lot of these protocols, if they're even gonna work. And somebody said, so what's the solution if oracles are so bad? I don't think oracles are so bad in general. It's just that, this is, we're sort of in like the 2016, 2017 era with layer ones, whenever everyone was like, oh, blockchains are never going to be good for anything because they're so slow. So, you have to use one of these sort of centralized systems, like an EOS or, some other god-awful, really fast chain. It doesn't necessarily make sense, because there are use cases for Ethereum and there are use cases for actually decentralized oracles. You just have to sort of be okay with taking your time on that. And I think that's what we're going to start seeing, whether it was, even Augur or some of those prediction market oracles that were still slow. People are starting to realize what oracles can do and build products around them. And that's what's actually going to make things make sense. We got a question from James. Can you talk about the flash loan attack? So the flash loan attacks aren't necessarily an oracle issue. So the flash loan attacks were, flash loans are where you can basically borrow money within a block for free. So you can borrow a whole lot of tokens and use them to sort of throw a price. And what was happening here was that somebody was using, partly Uniswap as an oracle. I believe. I think this is the one you're talking about. And this was, I had sort of talked about it whenever you have a derivatives project. So my previous job, I actually worked at the CFTC doing derivatives research, and there's a whole, if you have a settlement procedure, using a last traded price is just an awful idea, because people are just there's like a whole issue of people like banging the close in the futures markets, and you see it. It's just going to be awful, especially in an unregulated space. So you can't use just a last traded price. Like, even if you're getting that last traded price from a centralized exchange and getting it pushed there, somebody can still manipulate it. You want to have a VWAP or a time-weighted average. But anyway, somebody borrowed a whole bunch of money through the Uniswap price and made a bunch of money on a derivative. I think, with the flash loans, I think people should be thinking about it, but what they should also be thinking about when their oracle is like, well, what if there was a giant whale out there who wanted to throw the price? You should think about that when designing your derivative project. So yeah, that would be it. So Marina wrote, do you think as soon as we solve I don't know. I don't understand that question, but so Blockchain Brad, he asks, how do you get devs to care about DeFi in the pragmatic sense? Do you think your Oracle best aligns? So, I mean, obviously, I love my Oracle, and I think it aligns with kind of the decentralized ethos. So, yeah, how we get people to do this and think about it in some of these more revolutionary terms, it's going to be tough. You know, it's always one of those things, kind of like you saw the slide. Like if people you see it with layer ones too. I mean, if VCs continue to throw money at layer ones, you're going to keep getting more layer ones. It's just sort of, if that's where the money goes, and people aren't, you know, none of them are even getting adoption, but you know, the teams are making money, so you're going to get more of them. Somebody actually asked, is it hard to implement multiple oracles? If not, why are projects not using multiple oracles? This is such a good question, because I think it's probably positioned towards. So we actually started something called the Alliance of Decentralized Oracle. So we're working on an EIP. So if you guys go out there, EIP 2362, we're looking for a standard way to read Oracle prices. That way it makes it really easy to implement multiple oracles in your system. You can just sort of loop through addresses, or you can implement Tellor, and then if for whatever reason you don't like Tellor anymore, you can switch to another oracle. And so that, I think that's going to be something that really helps further the space whenever we sort of have an Oracle standard, because right now it is really hard to implement multiple oracles in the space, because you know, whether or not you're using Tellor versus Chainlink versus, you know, Maker's Oracle, it's a complete Solidity rebuild for your system. So yeah, makes it tough. And somebody wrote, so basically you're saying that all of DeFi is pretty much centralized. Any projects that you think are actually decentralized? So a lot of DeFi is centralized, and that goes in, you know, like, is Maker centralized? I don't know if, so Maker holds some of their, you know, the ability to stop the Oracle attacks with their token holders. But yeah, I mean, a lot of DeFi is kind of centralized at the moment. You know, Chris Black does a really good job. He talks about kind of admin keys in the space, and he talks about just everybody. I think oracles are another really big problem for basically every single derivatives protocol. It's, you know, they're just completely centralized. But, you know, ones with a lot of ones without Oracle. So, you know, Uniswap, it seems relatively decentralized, and several, you know, there are some good decentralized projects out there. I obviously talked about Augur, Gnosis. They're great projects. You know, usually what you'll see is a lot of the things that are actually decentralized can sometimes fail to really get a lot of steam going, because, like I said, it's tough whenever you have to make your UX worse, and somebody who puts in a centralized piece can just have, you know, they can have their cake and eat it too, or at least they think they can. So, and then, yeah, I think we have basically a last question. So, or what are we doing with V2? Somebody asked. So Tellor is we're trying to make our Oracle faster. We're implementing some security procedures to make Tellor just better and stronger, but also kind of keeping with the ethos of decentralization, which is really what we're trying to do. You know, we're trying to just continue to improve upon these lines, similar to how Ethereum thinks that they can scale. But you know, it takes time, and it slowly gets better, but you're not going to have these instantaneous transactions to be able to compete with a centralized one. So it's kind of, you have to really build things from the ground up. You know, you can't build a centralized project and try and decentralize later. I don't think it's ever worked. So.
Awesome. Thank you guys so much. This was an amazing session. All right, we are going to transition to the next one.